Okay, go for it. Okay. Hello, everyone. You may be wondering who I am. Here's kind of a brief thing. It's always awkward putting up a who am I thing, but this is who I am. A couple of things to know. We're going to be covering a lot of things, and I'm handing out CDs because there's going to be a lot of code samples. This way you don't have to worry about writing it down or what have you. If there's not enough CDs, then Iron Geek's going to put the PowerPoints online. The CDs have live malware, so be careful handling it. It's not my fault if you infect your own system. Don't do it anything mission critical. I started in the printing industry as a craftsman, and things change over time, so I adapted. Became a Unix admin, went to work at a startup company doing Windows database administration. No degree, but quite a few certs. I was one of the original members of the SecureBit podcast, and I work at a financial doing security type stuff. So what are we going to cover? First, we'll talk about the case for threat intelligence. We're going to go through the evasion techniques that attackers use to hide their attacks, the identification of exploit chains. I'm going to release a new tool today, Spondulus. I want you to, when you leave the talk, be able to deobfuscate JavaScript so that you can understand the attacks hitting your organization. And we'll talk briefly on the analysis of malware. Now, as a warning, I've got about 104 slides, so it's going to move quick. Start out with a story. It's a true story about my friend Bob. He was gone to lunch on a Friday afternoon, and when he came back, he got an urgent phone call. Yes, the CEO had received an email from a business partner talking about a current project. The only problem was the business partner didn't send the email. So you think, typical IT, how would you respond to that? Well, most companies are going to start out with scanning his computer with an antivirus. That's not going to do a lot of good. So you next step up and you scan with multiple AVs. Okay, if it still doesn't find anything, you probably submit the website to Anubis, VirusTotal or something, hoping that it will tell you if there's a threat. You might tell him to change his password. And then you might pray, gosh, I hope nothing's wrong. It got past me. But we're going to talk about a different approach. You may think that only military sites and high-value targets get these hard-to-detect or impossible-to-detect threats. But this came off of a fully patched machine that had the latest virus definitions. And if you are not speaking Chinese and you find Chinese file names on your computer, you got a problem. We like to think that our antivirus programs will catch the threats, but it's all too common that the virus programs will just not even see anything. This is a sample that I found. I submitted it to VirusTotal, completely invisible to the antivirus. Do you know if you're receiving that in your organization? You know, surprisingly, the AV detection rate is really, really low. The University of Alabama at Birmingham has a project that tracks spam, and they compare it to the virus detection rates and do the analysis on it. It's the emerging threats, and I would encourage any of you to sign up for the email list. But they found back in July that the mean detection rate was only 17%. So you've got basically a 1 in 6 chance of the malware actually being detected. So why do you want to perform threat intelligence? Well, if you find what's at the other end of a spear phishing link, you can develop the indicators of compromise. A lot of companies will sell you a vulnerability assessment that's a theoretical attack. But if you look at what is actually coming your way, you're going to more accurately see what your threats are. It'll give you a chance to practice your incident response skills, hopefully before you need them. While you're digging into it, you may discover third parties that have been breached, and if you want to be a good Samaritan, you can let them know that they've got a problem. You can raise the cost of attacking you. As you uncover their payloads and submit them to virus totals, definitions will soon be created that will help other people in the community. If you are using CLAM antivirus as a secondary, or Yara or some of the other tools, you can develop custom AV signatures, or if you have a support contract with your AV vendor, they can push the updates to you quicker. This is also a fantastic way to do security awareness for your staff, and especially management. If you get a spear phishing email from one of the managers, and you look at it and say, okay, this specific email you received, had you clicked on it, it would have redirected you through 3 different sites before the infection would compromise your computer. It would not be detected by your current antivirus program. You know that legacy software system that you really didn't want to budget to upgrade? Well, it requires an out-of-date version of Adobe Acrobat that makes you vulnerable to this attack. I hope none of your individual employees click on that. It's amazing how quickly they'll decide to fund the upgrade. You can also develop counterintelligence on your attackers. You'll notice that as you investigate, that they'll fall into certain categories, and you can profile the people that are coming after you. So when you think about client exploits, you've got the drive-by exploits, which are just random sites and just opportunity attacks. But the things that are really serious threats are a combination of social engineering and spear phishing. Here's an example of an ADP spear phishing. If it went to a customer service rep, you could probably say that it was a phishing attack. But if it took care of the person that takes care of your payroll, you could probably classify it as a spear phishing attack. It's pretty common when you have a spear phishing email that will have multiple links, they will all go to the same location. But this one didn't. Each of the individual links went to a different redirection host. And I've actually seen this email that would have the person's name to customize it just for them. So the attackers really don't want to be detected, and they're going to take steps to avoid analysis. They will look at what country your IP address is in, and if they're targeting people in the U.S. and your IP address is in Brazil or Germany, you'll get a normal web page instead of the payload. They also know the IP addresses of law enforcement, antivirus companies, and malware analysis sites. If the IP addresses they belong to these organizations visit the site, a lot of times they'll get a normal web page. The attackers will use something I call a redirection chains, and I've also heard this referred to as traffic direction servers. The victim PC will click on the first link. That first link will redirect through a series of other computers. I've seen as many as 7 layers of redirection used. For example, the phishing attack on Facebook where they want you to win the free iPad, they ask you for information. I've seen 7 layers of redirection on that. The attackers will use something called a cookie collector. You visit the first page on the website, which will redirect you to a second page after it has set a cookie. And if you have visited each of the pages in sequence, will you get the payload? If you go directly to their website, you get a normal web page. The attackers will look at the user agent strings or the referrer fields. If you're not familiar with the user agent string, it tells a lot about your computer, including the operating system and the web browser that's in use. The referrer field, and yes, I know referrer is misspelled, that's the way it's spelled in the RFC. But that will tell you what web page sent you to that site. And this is an actual example from a compromised server. This was from a business partner that I detected was breached. When you went directly to their website, you would get a normal web page. And in fact, I had a hard time convincing these people that they were breached. Apparently, they had a problem for about 6 to 9 months. But if you visited their website from these specific links at the top, then you would get the payload or redirection at the bottom. And that would take you to a website in Turkey. The attackers are increasingly looking for Tor exit nodes. The newest version of the BLACKHOLE exploit kit allows you to block delivery to Tor exit nodes. If they're looking for a specific victim, they may whitelist your IP address or your IP range. They may also block previous victims to keep from having problems or to avoid analysis. Other tricks that they'll use, instead of the normal GET request, they can do the POST request. As I mentioned, the earlier Facebook scam where you can win an iPad, they want you to enter information before you go to the next page. It's almost a CAPTCHA for the attackers. They may use AJAX or other persistent connections, and they can use image links instead of script links. When the browser goes to retrieve the image page, it's not there, and so the web server returns a 404 page that has embedded JavaScript. They may also send invalid HTML with spaces that the user has to correct. That way it can avoid automatic analysis engines. And they can monkey around with the timeout values on the server. So what do you use to do the analysis? Well, you can use a web browser, a SANDBOX browser, wget curl. There's a nice program called Mozilla, and the program that I'm releasing today is Spondulus. The problem with using a web browser is you may be using the wrong browser to receive the exploit. If you are being served an exploit for Windows, but you're actually using the web browser Safari, they may think it's a Mac and not give you the payload. Also, if the exploit takes advantage of the browser, it can cause your browser to crash, interfering with your analysis. It will also hide your redirection links that occur in the background, hiding the individual people that have been compromised. And naturally, if you're not sandboxed, you risk infection. wget and curl are some great command line programs. They're general purpose URL, but they really don't have some of the features that we need and make our lives easier. Of course, they're not vulnerable to JavaScript exploits, but as I said, they don't parse the links for you. Mozilla is a great program. Unfortunately, it's Windows only, and it doesn't support post request or some of the other things. I haven't seen an update in the last several years, and so as a result, I created my own program. Spondulus is out on SourceForge. It is a command line, but it does have a menu driven for beginners. It's not vulnerable to JavaScript, obviously, because it doesn't understand JavaScript. It supports GET, POST, and AJAX. It has a couple of features that none of the other tools I found offered, such as monitor mode, which will allow you to track changes over time. It allows you to input files, like if you receive an HTML-based email or an HTML attachment, and it gives you the opportunity to generate agent strings. So the first mode is just calling the program by itself, and when you do, it'll pop up a menu that lets you select your user agent. You can take the default user agent, which is currently Windows XP Service Pack 3 with Internet Explorer 6. That may change in the future. Or you can generate an IE agent or a FIREFOX agent. Or you can put in your own custom string. Here we get a chance to select the Internet Explorer user agent. We select the operating system that we want to spoof. We put in the URL that we want to visit. If there's a refer, we can fill that in or leave it blank. Any cookies that we want to submit, an output file, and birds away. It'll show you the IP address that it's going to visit. Once it retrieves the page, it'll parse the output or the response and grab the individual links. You can look through these links, and a lot of times you can tell quickly where the next hop is. If all the links are on the same web server except for that one link that takes you to a .ru domain, that's probably your next hop. Here we see another screenshot where it is sorted into the cascading style sheets, the forms, and the script links, and so forth. The actual response from the server is captured in a raw file. That way you can look at it if you need to do any timing analysis, and you can see the chunk size and so forth if you want to fingerprint the servers. Of course, It's a lot more helpful if you can see what it means. And so if it detects that a page has been gzip or chunked encoded, it'll automatically translate it. Here we can see the DerbyCon output link. Monitor mode allows you to monitor changes over time. Some attackers will redirect from their exploit site and they'll take it out of service for a period of time before they flux back in. And so this program will issue queries at whatever interval you specify, and it'll look for changes in the content or the IP address. If it detects a change, it'll capture that and store it in your local file system. And here we can see the individual files that were captured that reflected a change in IP or content. They're timestamped for you. Input mode allows you to take a HTML-based email you've received and process it. You just give it a -I on the command line and specify the file. And it will automatically create the links file and the decoded file if necessary. It's got quite a few command line parameters that you can use to customize the behavior, including using Tor or changing the delays on the monitor mode. And if you're interested in helping, it could use some really cool artwork. We want to make this useful, and as the attackers adapt, this is going to have to be changed to remain relevant. So anybody that wants to contribute code will get recognized on the project. Bug reports will help improve this. And if you see methods the attackers are using that is not reflected in this would be very useful. So now let's get into a little JavaScript deobfuscation. There's several tools that you can use. SpiderMonkey and Rhino, to be quite honest, is more work than I needed for what the analysis I'm doing. Internet Explorer allows you to look at little chunks of JavaScript. There's a nice FIREBUG extension for FIREFOX, but I use VI or Vim and Python. Here we see Internet Explorer. If you're not familiar, you can actually put in the address bar JavaScript : and a little snippet of code. This is really handy if they've got some kind of fancy mathematical function that you want to see what that snippet of code does. You can debug it in the browser window. Here, the FIREBUG extension for Firefox. You can put little snippets of code. And then, as I said, Vim is probably the best editor around, at least in my opinion. Python is a great scripting language. You can use it from the command line, or there's also a lot of IDEs that help you develop your code. Some of these will give you code completion, and they'll give you balloon help if you're not sure of the syntax to use. So now let's look at some of the obfuscation techniques. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every obfuscation technique that can be used, but this is probably 95% of what you'll see. The first one's concatenation, where they break the strings into individual elements, and we add them together. And as I said, these code samples are on these CDs, so you don't have to worry about remembering them. Of course, the character code, where you take the ASCII equivalent and then you convert it to the characters. Hexadecimal character codes. Arithmetic on the character codes. Instead of taking the actual ASCII character, they may add 5, subtract 4, multiply by 3, or do other type of math on it. String splitting, where they'll put junk in the string that has to be removed to uncover the payload. Character replacement. In this example, I've taken the number 0 through 9 and the comma and replaced them with letters. This is going to be hard to catch on an IDS. Reversing the string. Is it any wonder this stuff is getting past our antivirus programs? Decimal or base 32. This one's kind of a mind bender. Most of us are familiar with the base 10 and probably hexadecimal. There's probably less of us that are familiar with base 32, but you're actually using the letters A through V to count the numbers of 10 through 31. Here we see some base 32 conversions. It uses the first powers of 32 that are added together. For example, the word alert is 5 characters, so you would use the first 5 powers of 32 and multiply these numbers, and so you would get this result. You may see these numbers that go to a 2 string, and here is an example of it in use. Function references. They can split the function definition across multiple lines and then execute it at the end. Now we're going to look at an actual application of this deobfuscation. We're going to look at the BLACKHOLE exploit kit a step at a time. That big glob is assigned to a variable G. And if you look at the very end of that line, it's got a replacement string where it says the letters H, W, E, H, E, S have to be removed and replaced with nothing. Then at the very bottom of the page, we've got a portion where it's breaking up that big chunk into 2-character segments, converting it to base 16 and putting it into an array. The next thing is it's going to transform that array into the actual payload. So how do we do this? The first thing we want to do is start the interpreter. Here I'm doing it from the interactive mode. The file that I've captured, I want to read it into the interpreter, and so I use the open command and create a file handle called Z. When I open the file, I give it a mode, in this case a R, to say I want to read the file. I read in the entire contents of the file and then close the file. If you're not sure what functions are available on a specific object, you can type dir and give it the object. Here we see the various functions that are available. If you're not sure how to use a specific function, you can type help, give it the object name, and then dot function. So you could say help parentheses y dot make trans, and it'll give you a detailed help. So that string G, we want to isolate the string from the things that are before it and after. So we look for the G equals and the first double quotes. We find that at position 427 within the file. Since we're looking for a pattern that's 3 characters wide, we add 3 characters to 427, and we know that starting at position 430 will be the beginning of our payload. We can tell the find command that we want to begin looking at a certain portion. Since we found the beginning of the payload at position 430, we can begin searching at 440 for the end of the payload. And here we find it at position 92,782. So we grab that slice and assign it to object G. We want to perform the replace function to remove HWE, HES and replace it with nothing. Next, we go over that object G and break it into 2-letter objects. We convert it to base 16 and append it to an array. On the right side, you can see the information that's in the web page that was retrieved from the server and how we translate it on the left side to actual Python code that will decode it. You can see that it really mirrors what's being sent to you. After we've decoded it, we want to verify, and we can grab the first 80 characters of the payload, and we see it says waiting for a redirect. We want to save our work so that we don't have to go through this process again, so we open a file for writing, and that's where the W parameter at the end of open does for us. We output the file, and then we close the file. And this is what we get when we've decoded the black hole. What a mess. Where do you begin looking at this? That's where I use Vim. Vim supports regular expressions, which will let you put carriage returns at the end of certain semicolons and so forth, but it also supports something called code folding. It's almost like folding up a sheet of paper and then opening up the section that you want to look at. We can see the individual commands that will create the folds that you just saw. So what do you do when you're looking at the BLACKHOLE exploit kit? Well, you can see what versions of software it's attacking. You can see the individual payloads that will be delivered. So once you have that URL, you can actually go out and retrieve the payload. Once you've retrieved the payload, you can submit it to VirusTotal, where it'll be scanned with 42 different antivirus programs. That will help other people in the community. You know, the problem with using antivirus programs is they're only looking at things that have attacked other people previously. It's like trying to plan a picnic in Louisville for today based on a weather forecast of San Diego from last week. It's not really telling you what's relevant to you. You can take the virus samples and submit it to one of the various sandboxes, such as the GFI sandbox. It'll do the behavior analysis and give you the indicators of compromise. You can identify the command and control servers, which can be helpful when you're looking through your firewall logs to see if anybody's reaching out to these specific machines. Once you have the indicators of compromise, you'll know what registry keys are being created. A lot of the malware will download a dropper that will pull in a secondary payload, and it'll delete the original file. But these secondary files will be added to registry keys, and this will be revealed in the analysis. But the attackers are getting more sophisticated, and they're taking a lot of anti-forensics techniques. But I wanted to show you a sample of the GFI sandbox, and you can see that this specific malware, which was a copy of Zeus, checked for the debugger. You can see whether it creates additional windows, drops EXEs, or starts other processes. You can see the individual files that it's deleted. Here are some of the registry keys. This is very useful information for your incident response folks. Here we see the secondary payloads being downloaded and the IP addresses. This one was submitted to VirusTotal, did not have very good detection rate. Eureka is a pretty interesting site. It gives you the opportunity to upload malware. It'll unpack it, disassemble it, and show you the flow graphs. Once you look at that, you can see some of the various functions that are being called, and it'll give you an idea of what the malware is doing. IDAPRO, if you're not familiar with it, I highly suggest it. You can load in the malware, look at the imports. You can look at any exports if it's a DLL. You can trace through and find the obfuscation and packing techniques. Feed it into OLIdebug, where you can actually trace through the code and have the malware debug itself. So in summary, antivirus programs are increasingly ineffective. Your organization is likely getting hit with undetected threats. And if you're not looking to see exactly what they are, you may be missing a lot of the issues. Attackers are using anti-forensic techniques to avoid automatic analysis, so you're going to have to find what this stuff does out yourself instead of relying on an AV vendor to protect you. You need to start performing your own threat analysis to see how it affects you. Questions? Yes? The question was that Mozilla does a great job of doing deobfuscation, and is there a reason that I quit using Mozilla and began using it, my approach? The answer to that is Mozilla is good, but the attackers are adapting their obfuscation techniques, And doing it this way gives me a chance to become more familiar myself and adapt to their changing tactics. If you can use Mozilla and it accomplishes what you need, go for it. It'll save you a lot of time. But doing it the other way is a fallback in case they defeat Mozilla.
What is the comparison? Are they both, do both tools say the same thing? One might give you an insight to be able to do.
The question is, do the tools give you the same information, or does one tool have an advantage of the other? Mozilla is probably easier to use being a GUI-based program. It only supports GET request. It does have the decoding option. It is scriptable, but for example, it doesn't support post request. For the example of the Win the iPad on Facebook, it'll ask you for pieces of information and submit that as a post. Well, Mozilla doesn't understand that. Yes, you could use curl or wget, but they're a little awkward to use.
Well, I was actually entering the statement more than a question. The reason for the thing is use both of them.
Yes.
And compare the results. Are they both saying relatively the same thing, or is one in your analysis use them both?
They should return the identical results if they support the feature. For example, Spondulus will allow you to track changes in a website over time. Some of the attackers, as I mentioned earlier, will change their IP address every few hours, and this way you can track that. Other questions? The intention of this is that if we can, as a community, start doing our own analysis, we can inform breach victims that we encounter. I know that I frequently encounter dress shops, newspapers, attorneys, and I try to be a nice guy and call them to let them know they're breached when I can. The type of malware that I see is financial based. They're interested in attacking their sites and emptying their bank account. I've uncovered some of the water hole sites where a financial would be compromised in the hopes of compromising other financials. And I think that this type of analysis will really help further our industry.
Can you use Spondulus to pull out URLs from email also?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
When you put the URLs out of the web pages, when you pull out the first web page, then you pull all the URLs out. Can you do that to email also? Can you use it for parsing emails and extract URLs?
The question was, can Spondulus parse the URLs from email? Yes, HTML emails, it'll parse it out and give you the individual links. Yes?
Are you using a VM first to just serve the site and get the malware and get the cookie values and stuff you need that you're going to import into Spondulus, and then basically revert to snapshot, and then you have your data? How are you doing your sandboxing so you don't get the exploit on your computer?
Okay. The question was, how do I keep from infecting myself while I'm doing the analysis? Is that I will perform Spondulus inside of a sandbox or inside of a virtual machine, and that way if I do accidentally trigger the exploit, I can just roll it back. But all my analysis is done within the virtual machine. Other questions? Yes? If I understand your question correctly, it's why not run the actual malware in the virtual machine, infect it, and grab the actual malware. The reason is that it hides the various jump points that get you to the infection page. You could do a TCP dump, grab that out and see what requests are being used, and compare that against your firewall logs and see who's visiting that. That would be another approach. Other questions? Okay, I have this sample of disk. These go through it has the individual slides if you want to follow through and do it yourself. I have some samples of the Blackhole exploit kit that are encrypted so that you won't accidentally infect yourself. It's got a password. There is a file in that directory that tells you the password. It also has copies of Spondulus for Windows and the Python version 3 form of it. It has some useful links that can help you on your journey to do the threat analysis. They've asked me to hand these out at the registration desk so that we don't bottleneck the next speaker. So, thank you very much.